those are the main changes. The prize money is exactly the same, $25,000 total, with a $5,000 first prize. And this attracts the people from all over the country, all over the world, really. We have them from California, from Wisconsin, and they can, $5,000 makes it worth their while to come down and participate in the tournament. And some of them would come if there wasn't any money just for the trophy, because they want those bragging rights for the year.
Where does the money go?
Okay, it goes to various things, but our big charity is helping Camp Astor. They tell me that most of them are crying to stay when their parents go back to pick them up. So we're proud to be involved with Camp Astor. We also give scholarships to the local college here, to the trade school over in Opp. We also help with exchange student program among Rotary clubs. We recognize some of our Rotarians with this by giving $1,000 to Rotary International for Paul Harris Fellows. We help with Alcoholics Anonymous, and we help with the Red Cross. Those are the charities.
A question that comes to mind now after all of this, where do we go from here? What is next?
Brown Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church was established in 1869. The current building was constructed in 1909. It was from this church in 1965 that the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led hundreds of blacks and whites in a march to Montgomery, a march initially marred by violence and later called a milestone of the American Civil Rights Movement. Today, people came just as they have for years to sing and pray in the historic building. About 150 people watched as Selma Mayor Joe Smitherman, who stood outside the church in '65, came inside today to present a certificate to church leaders, a certificate which officially enters the church in the National Register of Historical Places.
I'd like to say that Selma is indeed a historical city, and I think the cornerstone of us being such a historic, strong city has been that we are a city of churches. Now, this church takes its place among the leaders of all the churches in our city as one of the most beautiful churches, and a church that has experienced and seen much history. I know I have been on the outside of this church when I felt its power, and I've been on the inside of this church when I felt its power.
The award came as a result of work by the Selma-Dallas County Historic and Preservation Society. In accepting the certificate, Pastor Joe Rembert said the work started in the chapel so long ago is not finished. His sermon for this Sunday morning was titled, "Don't Forget to Remember." From Brown Chapel AME Church in Selma, Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
The founder of the Alabama Consumers Alliance says the alliance could only back a gubernatorial candidate who could dedicate himself to putting government back into the hands of the people. Nancy Rawls says her group wouldn't endorse anyone connected to a utility company or someone who won't fight for lower utility rates. Today, the alliance said George C. Wallace fits the bill.
The public will be represented. They will be represented in a manner in which there will be fair play toward the power company, and certainly fair play, which is certainly needed for the public.
The alliance didn't exist during the 1978 election, so its ability to get voters to the polls is untested. Still, Rawls says a candidate would be foolish to ignore the Consumers Alliance. Rawls believes Alabamians are tired of paying high utility rates, and that feeling will show up at the polls this fall. The alliance claims more than 30,000 members, but only about 50 people turned out for today's endorsement meeting. The alliance also endorsed Billy Joe Camp, a candidate for U.S. Congress from the 2nd District, Jim Pugh, a candidate for State Senate from District 26, and Kelly Curenton, who is running for the Public Service Commission. Susan Silvernail, WSFA TV News.
First, I would not have been for a change in the retirement plan if it affected anybody who was presently working for the state. I don't believe in changing the rules in the middle of the game. But this plan would not affect, unless somebody wanted it to affect them, anybody who is presently working for the state. The retirement system is costing and is going to cost the state of Alabama too much money in the future, and I think it's time right now to make plans against that eventuality so that the system will be able to provide the funds for those people who have retired and who are going to retire and still remain solvent. And I think that the thing to do is to make the adjustment now for future employees so when they come to work, they'll know under what terms they'll be coming. I support that.
Well, I felt like I could go a long ways. I didn't know how far I would go. I never ran no competition until, about the 4th or 5th match, and so I had, I had all the breaks myself. The best player always gets the best breaks.
Look at there.
How many is that?
It's a pity, but it's still a fact. An image has been created about men of the cloth, preacher men, if you please. It's not a very flattering image. Always they're on the portly side. They're not noted for their good looks. They're very reverential in their demeanor. And athletes they are not. Then along comes a preacher like Dr. John Ed Matheson of Frazier Memorial United Methodist Church, and he makes a mockery of that image. It's disgusting how slim and trim he is. He's a good-looking devil. No, that's a terrible choice of words. Make that a good-looking guy. It's hard to catch him without a smile on his face. And he may be one of the best all-around athletes in Alabama. John Ed Matheson was born 44 years ago, and the first time he ever posed for a photographer, aged 2 months, he had already developed that disarming grin that he still uses with effectiveness. And look at him when he was a year old. Other than your own kids, have you ever seen a cuter little boy? Being what they call in the trade a PK, a preacher's kid, John Ed lived in several places before the family settled in Opelika when he was 12. This is what the new kid in town looked like when he entered the 6th grade. John Ed's senior year at Opelika High School was memorable. He made the all-state basketball team, but much, much more importantly, it was during that year that he made the decision to spend the rest of his life working for the Lord. After graduating from Huntington College, Matheson earned a bachelor's degree in divinity from Emory, a master's degree from Princeton University, and then later he returned to Emory to earn his Doctor of Divinity degree. After serving churches in Mobile and Phoenix City, Matheson came to Montgomery in 1972 as pastor at Frazier Memorial. And what has happened at that church since that time has been nothing short of miraculous. Membership has increased from 400 to more than 3,000, making it not only Montgomery's largest church, but the fastest growing church in Alabama. At this moment, a new sanctuary is nearing completion, which will seat an astonishing 1,850 people. With 3 services now being held each Sunday morning, and Matheson preaches at all of them, he envisions sharing the Word of God with 5,000 people every Sunday. There's no way you can get John Ed Matheson to take any credit for the success of Frazier Memorial. He gives the glory to the Lord and a pat on the back to a hard-working staff and to some dedicated lay leaders. Throughout all these years, Matheson has remained one of the foremost tennis and racquetball players in Alabama and the South. He's won more state championships than any man around in both sports. Not surprisingly, the other members of the Matheson family are cut from the same mold as John Ed. There's his strikingly attractive wife, Joan, a Tuskegee native. They have a pretty daughter, Vicki, a 16-year-old junior at Jeff Davis, and 12-year-old Si, a spitting image of his old man and already a pretty fair basketball player himself. Dr. John Ed Matheson, maybe he doesn't fit the image of the typical preacher, but he's a remarkably effective witness for the Lord and a very interesting person.
Combing through the rubble. Our officers will be on duty all night long. It's just like cleaning up after a bombing in that area. It is, the firemen will be there, the Jefferson police are here, Jefferson Parish police are here, Harriet police has come to assist. All the police agencies are assisting us in this operation.
Ruth, earlier we were warned that there might be problems with looters. Has there been such a problem?
Yes, we arrested one man. He was caught at 5:45 this evening. He is Lex Chipinelli, 25, of 4257 Rome Drive in Kenner. He is charged with theft and possession of stolen things.
All right, thank you very much. Ruth Barnett from the Kenner Police Department. The crash has devastated the Kenner community. Willard Shepard reports the plane wiped out almost everything in its path.
Residents were devastated by the crash. The plane hit near 17th and Fairway. It wiped out homes in the area and left wreckage everywhere. Parts of the plane were on rooftops, in backyards, on front lawns. Firefighters battled blazes that were caused by the crash. Foam and water were used to cool the wreckage. Some homes were totally wiped out, while immediately next door, others stood intact.
All right, well, I live on Hudson Street, which was about 2 houses away when it happened. I just got through cutting the grass, and I went inside. The big, great boom, like you wouldn't believe, went off. So we thought the lightning hit a transformer. Well, my wife said, God, what was that? I said, I don't know, honey. I said, let's go see. As soon as we come out, we looked out the door. There's a piece of the engine standing in the middle of Hudson Street. Flame.
Hospital emergency workers combed through the wreckage looking for survivors. Every possible sheriff's deputy and firefighter was called to the scene, hoping to find people who were still alive in nearby homes. Emergency workers only found one small child alive. Willard Shepard, News Center 6.
And this just into News Center 6. Apparently a Marrero woman was aboard the plane when it crashed. She is identified as 83-year-old Elizabeth Gidrose, who was en route to Las Vegas to visit her grandsons. This information comes to us from the Las Vegas airport. The call went out tonight for blood for those injured on the ground in that plane crash.
Like everybody else, I figure I'd do my part. It's just it. Got some extra blood, give it to somebody that needs it.
Doctors will use the platelets from the blood in the treatment of the burn victims. The center will stay open until 11 o'clock or until most of the people waiting in line have donated their blood. The center will reopen again tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning. Mark Phillips, News Center 6.
And coming up next, we will talk with a man who flies a 727.
The Pan American plane tore through several blocks of houses, setting many homes on fire before it finally exploded. Black smoke covered the entire area some 2 miles from the New Orleans airport. Hours after the accident, fire departments from 4 cities poured water and foam onto the burning wreckage and debris. The remains of the plane's fuselage came to rest on top of a station wagon. Late this evening, rescue crews were still searching for survivors. The burn center at one hospital was placed on 24-hour duty, and a citywide call for doctors was put out, as well as a plea for blood donors. Fire officials say by early this evening, most of the fires were brought under control, but officials reported that they expected to be putting out spot fires throughout the night. Eyewitnesses described the accident as something out of a war movie. One woman says she heard the plane flying low over her house just before the crash. She thinks she heard the engine cut off. Fire officials say as many as 30 to 60 houses may have suffered damages. Robin Lloyd, NBC News, New Orleans.
News Center 6 tonight with Alec Gifford, Nancy Holland, Buddy DiLiberto, and Dan Milham.
Good afternoon. Tonight's top news, tonight's only news, the crash of a Pan Am 727, that crash on takeoff from New Orleans Airport this afternoon. The plane lifted off the east-west runway, then plunged into a residential area of Kenner. That crash now being called the second worst single air disaster in American history. It killed at least 145 people on board, 136 of them passengers. Alec Gifford at this time is standing by in the crash site in Kenner, where rescue workers are still searching for the victims that may remain from that crash on the ground. Alec?
That's right, Nancy. And we're standing here with Sheriff Harry Lee. We'll be talking with him in just a moment. Here's what's going on back there. I just came back from the scene. Rescue workers are sifting through the wreckage of the homes, and it is total devastation back there. Homes totally wiped out by the jetliner as it came down. We're at a command post about 2 blocks away from the scene of the crash, about a mile east of New Orleans International Airport, where the plane went down about 5 or 6 hours ago. Sheriff Harry Lee is back there directing part of the rescue operation. What's it like, Sheriff Lee?
Well, it was a while before we controlled the fire. They were very much concerned. The Kenner Fire Department was in charge. Up until the fire was secured, there was about 40,000 pounds of fuel still on board. So we couldn't commence the rescue operation until the fire department gave us the okay. Very fortunate, I don't know if you already heard or not, they recovered a baby. It looked like she was about 18 months or 2 years old.
Yes, as a matter of fact, we do know that. We'll have pictures of that scene later in the newscast.
She was there, but it appears that as of this hour, when we just left there 10 minutes ago, there seemed to we've recovered about 80 bodies so far.
80 bodies have been recovered so far.
Yeah.
Sheriff, what's the situation for the rest of the night now?
Chief Lentini has asked some of his people to go home to get some rest, and we've asked some of our people to go home. We're going to continue operations throughout the night. The Pan Am officials just arrived right before you did from New York. The FAA has been on scene immediately after the accident. They're looking at the investigation, and all we're doing now is trying to recover the bodies.
Is there any reason to believe there may be survivors like that baby boy or baby girl in there?
No, I think that was a miracle. It's the whole area is cleared out and wiped out, and there was one particular area, we don't know why, there was about 20 bodies in one location. The only big part of the plane left is the tail section that we saw, and we're getting calls all the time that there's parts of the airplane all over the area.
All right, Sheriff Lee, I know you want to get back in there, so we'll let you go. And Nancy, we'll be coming back later in this half hour to bring you hopefully a further report of what's going on in there. But as we say, it is total devastation. It is a eerie scene of lights and smoke still coming up from the ground there. Rescue workers still recovering bodies. As Sheriff Lee just told you, 80 bodies already recovered. We'll be going back to the scene and we'll report back to you in about just a few minutes as soon as we return. Back to you, Nancy.
All right. Thank you, Alec. And I think that was 18 bodies that have been recovered so far. The crash has been described as the second worst single airplane disaster in U.S. history. Elizabeth Curran reports on how it all happened.
There was virtually no recognizable trace of the airplane from the wreckage. The Boeing 727, just like this one, took off from New Orleans International Airport at 4:09 this afternoon. At 4:11, it went down, cutting a path of destruction through 2 blocks of homes.
You wouldn't believe a gas explosion when it wiped out the house over there on 17th and Fairway. The house was completely demolished, and the gas was shooting straight up about 100 feet. Then besides that, I looked over. The fumes from the plane was going up about 300 feet. So all I could think of was get the people out of the houses. So we went from house to house, me and a couple other guys, and we got all the people out.
There were many other such heroes in the wake of the crash. 143 people were on board when the plane went down. 14 first-class passengers, 122 coach class, 4 flight service attendants, and 3 in the cockpit. The Pan Am Flight 759 originated in Miami and was ultimately destined for San Diego after a stopover in Las Vegas. The crash site about 2 miles from the airport near 17th Street was strewn with rubble, and smoke filled the air because the plane apparently exploded after it went down. The death count continues to rise, but just as officials had given up hope of any survivors in the wreckage, a 16-month-old little girl was found alive. Elizabeth Curran, News Center 6.
And we will have more on that child's condition later in this newscast. Red Cross officials say there will be a moratorium of at least 24 hours on the names of those who died in that crash. Red Cross spokeswoman Pat Jackson says the bodies were badly burned and it will take days for forensic specialists to go through the rubble. Jackson says at this point there is no way to get an accurate body count. A Red Cross official says people checking on survivors can call the New Orleans Red Cross at 586-8191, 586-8191. The Red Cross will take your name and number, and when information can be released, inquiring relatives and friends will be called. After Flight 759 went down, members of the families of those aboard were rushed to...
The best in the domino game were in Alabama over the weekend to find out who was the best of all. We have a report from Ed Highland of affiliate WSFA in Montgomery.
At table after table in the Lurleen B. Wallace Junior College Auditorium, an intense look colors the faces. Concentrate, deliberate, until the black dotted tile hits with a resounding... Dominoes are serious business here at the 7th Annual World Championship, especially when $5,000 is up for grabs. Why else would 500 players come from across the country to Andalusia, Alabama? To qualify for the title, you must win at least 11 matches during the 3-day event. It is now down to the final bout. Defending champion James Morgan of Bassfield, Mississippi, is pitted against Sylacauga, Alabama's W.L. Matters. The first match goes to Morgan. Matters comes back to take the second. In the decisive third, the champ is about to be dethroned when the dominoes begin to fall his way.
Go ahead and give it to me. I hadn't got a 4, I hadn't got a 1.
I really enjoy your nice fun play with you.
And what's the secret to becoming the tournament's first back-to-back winner?
Say about 60-40, 60 skill and 40 luck.
For domino players, the season does not end here. They say it takes constant practice to be a champion. So Jim Morgan and many of the other contestants will head next for Big Springs, Texas, the next stop on the domino tour. Ed Highland in Andalusia, Alabama for NBC News.
We'll be back in a moment.
Chief Probate Clerk Bob Smith and his assistant Jane Stevenson are manually assigning the county's 113,000 registered voters in the proper precinct. Not all voters in the county will be affected by redistricting. So far, only those people in precincts 1 through 6, 13, and 21. Most of the precincts, like number 21, are being reduced in size because of the legislature's newly drawn reapportionment map that cuts through existing precincts, and probate workers are having to make adjustments. So far, 5 new precincts, numbers 23 through 27, have been created, and Smith says it's a tedious task.
It's very tedious. We have to go in and look at each and every block, the address limits of each block, and see who lives there, who is registered there, and move them on the new list.
Once all voters are in the proper precinct, their names are fed in a computer for a new poll printout. The names must also be published in the newspaper, and voters must be notified by mail if they're in a new precinct. Workers have an August 1st deadline to complete the tedious task of re-identifying the registered voters in Montgomery County. Chief Clerk Smith says they'll be working diligently to complete the job on time, so voters will know which precincts to vote in. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
I'd say it's 1 billion to 1.
Muse says the chances are slim because when a commercial airliner takes off from Montgomery's Danley Field, the nearest subdivision directly in line with the takeoffs is South Lawn. Muse says by the time commercial jets reach the subdivision, they're about 1,000 feet in the air.
Even if he lost all of his engines over South Lawn, he could still glide and crash land aircraft into a farm field or something where there wouldn't be any houses.
Muse says about the only way a jet would crash into the subdivision is if it lost complete control, and then the craft would become an unguided missile that could land anywhere. Archie Bland, a retired Air Force technician, has lived in South Lawn for the past 12 years, and he's lived with the 1 billion to 1 odds on a daily basis.
I'm concerned about the traffic here at Danley Field because I often think about it. The zooming and the way they come over this area.
Has it ever bothered you enough to perhaps think about leaving this area?
It has. It has.
Because he's retired, Bland says he can't afford the move. Economics has also played a part in Frederick Pinnock's decision to move to South Lawn 4 years ago. He too is concerned.
Sometimes when they fly so low, I get up to find out exactly where they are because the noise vibrates the house.
Despite the noise and the vibrating house, residents of South Lawn may find comfort in the fact in 30 years that commercial flights have gone in and out of Danley Field, not a single jetliner has crashed. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
Permit to remodel existing. I believe we have a good police department, and I intend to keep it that way. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the mayor, council for appointment to the position. I work as hard as a
traffic. I think we've had
It's hurting quite a few children. They ended up with their hands all bruised up and the legs scratched up from 10, I think, being cut.
Here.
According to company officials, measured service allows customers to control how much they pay for monthly phone service. Instead of paying the regular flat rate of $12.65, customers can pay as little as $9.49 a month for measured service.
The local rate will go up in the future. This local measured service option is an alternative to paying flat rate service today and in the future.
There's a $5 allowance charge that's included in the $9.49, so if the local calls exceed the $5 limit, then the bill goes up by that amount.
If you never used more than the $5 allowance, the illustrative here, if you never used more local usage than that $5 allowance, your rate would be $9.49, and that's what you would pay every month, month in and month out. But let's just say you used $6 of local usage. Then you would pay $9.49 plus $1. So you'd be paying then $10.49.
This service is only being offered for people with phone numbers beginning with 2683 or 293 and who live in Holtville and Prideville. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Finalize that loan. Now, of course, the telephone companies don't start paying higher than that, Commissioner. Some companies.
Are we going to be presenting something before July the 20th?
After approval of the loan, prior to the drawdown.
Mr. Shard.
The legislature's newly approved redistricting lines slice through existing precincts, causing Montgomery County probate office workers to make quite a few adjustments. So far, Chief Probate Clerk Bob Smith and his assistant Jane Stevenson have created 5 new precincts, numbers 23 through 27. They're having to shift voters into the proper precincts, notify them by mail of the move, and feed changes into a computer for a new poll printout. All this by August 1st.
We have to go in and find all the voters that now live in that new precinct and put them in that new precinct. And we have to do this by street address.
Is it a tedious task?
Oh yes, it's very tedious. We have to go in and look at each and every block, the address limits of each block, and see who lives there, who is registered there, and move them on the new list.
Smith urges voters to be patient. He and his assistant are working diligently to get the 113,000 registered voters in Montgomery County to the proper voting precinct. The pair must make the necessary adjustments by hand. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the County Courthouse.
The possible legal battle over prayer in public schools came into season as Governor James signed a bill allowing teachers to lead willing Alabama students in a voluntary prayer. While the governor says he's not welcoming any court challenge of the law, he says the intent of the bill is to attack the 1962 U.S. Supreme Court decision banning prayer in public schools, and he says the time is right for just such a challenge.
Congress has been dicking around with a constitutional amendment. The White House and the Justice Department coming forward with recommended solutions. It's time to address the 62 decision, not by trying to find a loophole, but by addressing the grounds as being erroneous grounds from which they derive that decision.
The governor says he'll hire whatever experts in constitutional law necessary to win any possible challenge. Governor James says his son, Bob James III, who authored much of the bill, will be closely involved in any legal battle at no cost. After signing the prayer bill, the governor vetoed another similar measure which mandated a 15-minute period to study the congressional process and read either the U.S. House or Senate opening prayer.
So in 1970, New Jersey law similar to that was declared unconstitutional. When you put in there shall, it's a mandated type of situation, and obviously it is unconstitutional.
There were other bills passed by the recent state legislature which affected Alabama property taxes. One of those bills was vetoed today by the governor. It would have ordered local governments to reduce local tax rates if their revenue jumped sizably due to the federal court-ordered equalization of property taxes. Governor James said local governing bodies already have that option. A second bill doubling the homestead exemption is still under consideration.
I'm not favorably disposed to doubling homestead exemptions.
Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
And always when I know an audience like this, I want to say it again. State of Alabama.
Dr. B.F. Dora says he only kept records since 1954 and knows for certain he delivered 9,500 infants, but says the total would be over 10,000 since he started delivering in 1949. But Dr. Dora says it's time for a change.
My wife's getting upset with me being all away from home all the time, never know when I'm going to be home, never know when to fix supper or not fix supper. So all the combination of the things, it's just time to bow out.
The mother of baby number 9,500, June Jones, says Dr. Dora was highly recommended by other patients.
And several friends had used Dr. Dora and recommended him highly. So I decided to give it a try. It's been real nice and helpful and answered everything I wanted to know.
Dr. Dora says the Jones baby is special since he's the last baby he will deliver, but says there were other special moments he remembers from his career.
Well, the most important and the most thrilling thing was delivering my grandchildren. I have 3 grandchildren, all of which I delivered, and that was the greatest thrill that I ever had.
Dr. Dora will continue with his general practice. The parents of the last baby delivered by Dr. Dora, Wesley and June Jones of Alex City, say they're proud to be among the 10,000 sets of parents in Dr. Dora's medical family. Mac Carmack, WSFA TV News at Baptist Medical Center.
Every day, commercial jetliners leave Montgomery's Danley Field Airport. And for the past 40 years, there has never been a commercial airline accident in the city. Airport Director Ken Muse says the chances of a jetliner crashing into a Montgomery subdivision are 1 billion to 1. Part of the reason for the long odds is due to where the flight paths are located. On the west side, it's open pasture land, but on the east side, there's South Lawn subdivision. Muse says it's possible for a commercial jet to lose all of its engines and still clear the community in time to land in open fields. Muse considers the Montgomery Airport one of the safest in the nation.
Our city fathers back in the 1950s had the foresight to come out with an airport hazard ordinance. As a result of this airport hazard ordinance, there are certain building restrictions within 2 miles of the boundaries of Danley Field and Maxwell Field, which control the type of construction, the height of obstacles, and such things as this. As a result of this ordinance, we have been able to keep our approaches relatively clear.
Despite the good record and the safety procedures at Danley Field, some South Lawn residents still fear the possibility of a crash landing in their community. a fear that has surfaced again following the Kenner, Louisiana crash.
During these plane accidents that has occurred in the last, 2 or 3 years, I often think about the planes going over this area. It would be a real tragedy, and to see one come down, and of course, I myself, I go to church, and I try to make myself right, just in case something does occur in this way. And so
Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
I'm concerned about the traffic here at Danleyfield, because I often think about it.
If your phone number begins with 2683, 293, or you live in Holtville or Prattville, then you can get the measured service. The service is being used in Montgomery on a trial basis and is available only for certain customers until Bell can equip other central offices. The company developed the new service as an alternative to the traditional flat rate pricing of phone calls. District Manager Todd Strange says people who use their phones infrequently will be able to save money by choosing the measured option. The measured service rate is $9.49 compared to the $12.65 regular flat rate. There's a $5 allowance fee built into the price. Local calling for the first minute is 4 cents and 2 cents for each additional minute in the first distance band, A. If you go over the $5 limit, then your bill will go up accordingly. There are 2 bands, and they're based on distance. There are different prices for the 2 bands. B band costs 2 cents more for calls, but there are discounts also, similar to long-distance calling for nights and weekends. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Governor James says he doesn't think it'll take very long for someone to challenge the voluntary prayer bill in court. The American Civil Liberties Union has already indicated it might take the legal step. If they do, it's just what Governor James is prepared for, a challenge of the ban on voluntary prayers.
So what our bill does, it hits right at the heart of the question that a lot of people have tried to get around by loopholes. It's saying the Founding Fathers never intended that you could not acknowledge God in any public institution. And that's what we're getting at.
The governor says the bill was carefully worded to stand the court test. He says the suggested prayer in the bill, written by his son, uses wording selected from the legislative papers of the First Continental Congress and the Declaration of Independence. While the governor feels the structure of the bill will defend itself, he also thinks the mood in Washington is shifting in his favor.
I can tell you that in other areas, mental health, prisons, we have seen the Supreme Court between 1975 and 1982 reverse decisions made by the Warren Court. We are also seeing Congress and the White House and the Justice Department reverse decisions in some of those areas.
The governor says the prayer bill will also stand on its own because it's voluntary. And that's why he vetoed yet another bill that would have mandated schools to spend at least 15 minutes studying Congress and reading the opening prayer of the U.S. House or Senate session.
Said, shall, you have to do it. And also in 1970, New Jersey law similar to that was declared unconstitutional.
One of the bills vetoed by the governor today is one of 3 property tax relief bills passed by the legislature during the special session. It would have ordered some local governments to reduce their tax rates. The governor says they already have that option. And he says he isn't favorably disposed to sign a bill that would double the homestead exemption, since Alabama already has the lowest property taxes in the nation. But it's a veto he'll withhold until he reads the bill tomorrow. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
The service is being used in Montgomery on a trial basis and is available only for certain customers until Bell can equip other central offices. The company developed the new service as an alternative to the traditional flat rate pricing of phone calls. District Manager Todd Strange says people who use their phones infrequently will be able to save money by choosing the measured option. The measured service rate is $9.49 compared to the $12.65 regular flat rate. There's a $5 allowance fee built into the price. Local calling for the first minute is 4 cents and 2 cents for each additional minute in the first distance band, A. If you go over the $5 limit, then your bill will go up accordingly. There are two bands, and they're based on distance. There are different prices for the two bands. B-band costs 2 cents more for calls, but there are discounts also, similar to long-distance calling for nights and weekends. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
The possible legal battle over prayer in public schools came into season as Governor James signed a bill allowing teachers to lead willing Alabama students in a voluntary prayer. While the governor says he's not welcoming any court challenge of the law, he says the intent of the bill is to attack the 1962 U.S. Supreme Court decision banning prayer in public schools. And he says the time is right for just such a challenge.
Congress has been dicking around with a constitutional amendment. The White House and the Justice Department coming forward with recommended solutions.
The governor says he'll hire whatever experts in constitutional law necessary to win any possible challenge. Governor James says his son, Bob James III, who authored much of the bill, will be closely involved in any legal battle at no cost. Chris Grimshaw for NBC News, Montgomery, Alabama.
Montgomery approach ident, and what type of approach you want to... Runway 12707, contact carrier's approach on 232.5 or 125.8.
Target 82, descend and maintain 2,000. Turn left heading 050. Gate 2, monitoring tower, reported Millbrook. Sierra 762, November, Bravo, making a reapproach ident. Citation 96 Alpha, be advised that the glide slope is out of service. Cherokee 15 Papa, you inbound to Danley now.
You about ready?
Cherokee 15 Papa, contact tower 119.7.